Hello everyone, it looks like it's time to get started. I want to welcome you all to our Essential Substance Abuse Skills webinar series. I'm Kate Trams, and today we have Matt Ignacio here to present on group counseling. This training series is brought to you by the National American Indian and Alaska Native Addiction Technology Transfer Center. We are part of the ATTC network, which also includes 10 regional centers and 5 international centers, a network coordinating office, and the National Hispanic and Latino ATTC. In the next couple of days, we will send out a follow-up email to everyone who attended, which will include a link to the recording, handouts of the slides, and a CEU request form. Our center is a NADAC certified educational provider, and we'd be happy to provide you with CEUs for a $15 fee. Immediately following today's webinar, you will be redirected to our GIPRA evaluation. This survey takes just a few minutes to complete and asks about your satisfaction with the event. This feedback is critical to our future work, and we value your opinion and would greatly appreciate your time in sharing your thoughts with us. You will be muted for the duration of this webinar, so please use the chat pod to share your questions and comments, and we will address questions at appropriate points during the presentation. Matt Ignacio is a doctoral candidate at the School of Social Work at the University of Washington, and he also works for our American Indian and Alaska Native ATTC as a research support manager. Matt has been a part of our program for many years in many capacities, and so we're so excited to have him officially on our staff right now. He has also served as a lead author for a 2013 Centers for Disease Control and Prevention funded publication titled Action, Compassion, and Healing, Working with Injection Drug Users in Native Communities. His prior work also includes the National Native American AIDS Prevention Center as a project manager and the Michael Powell Center for AIDS Care and Support in Gay Men's Health Crisis, the first and largest AIDS services organization. So I want to thank you so much, Matt, for being here and sharing your wonderful experience in group counseling with us, and I'm going to pass things over to you now.
Great. Thank you so much. Appreciate your help, Kate, in getting this organized. Good morning, everybody. I'm here live in the offices here at the National American Indian and Alaska Native ATTC in Iowa City, at the College of Public Health at the University of Iowa. I am part-time staff here. I do work remotely. I am based in Seattle because I'm still in graduate school. Well, I'll be in graduate school until June. I'm anticipating graduation this in just a few months. So I'm very excited to be part of the team and as a staff member. But as Kate had mentioned, I've consulted with the ATTC and participated in an advisory role in the years past. So great. If you also have, Deborah Erickson, thanks. Great. Hi. Good to see you. Please, if you'd like to give a shout out, or if you have any questions, that chat box is great because I'll know if there's a question or comment, and I can take a pause. Okay, so I want to be respectful of your time. My name is Matt Ignacio. I'm a member of the Tohono Nation, which is a tribal nation located in what is now known as Southern Arizona. And I am a social worker by trade, and I think one of the best things about my work and being a social worker and the training I received as a social worker is actually group work. Group work to me is what an experience to sit with a group of individuals over a period of time and witness the transformation from when they walked in the door to when they leave at the end of 10, 12 weeks. And to see, as a witness, at me being a witness, seeing that mutual support, seeing people come together and supporting each other in whatever the issue may be, and seeing people feel awakened and supported and on balance and better than when they walked in. I mean, that to me is such a powerful role to play in that process. I also use group counseling skills pretty much every day I'm on the job, whether I'm standing in front of a classroom, whether I'm delivering a webinar to folks I don't think I've had the chance to meet, to talking with family, even using these skill sets in organizing family meetings. So group counseling is really applicable to many, many aspects of our lives, and I want to just spend some time with you the next hour kind of chatting about how I go about the work and how we can conceptualize the work from an indigenous, from a native perspective, so that we can improve the health of native communities and all communities, really. Okay. Also, I'm on the camera. I'm not on the camera, but because I'm here at the offices, we have that equipment, so you get to see my mug in your face. All right. So I want to spend some time for sort of this part one, or kind of the how-to, the nuts and bolts. We'll talk about different types of groups that you might be running currently or interested in putting together. We'll talk about the types of membership in each of those groups, some sort of key aspects of implementing group work, and then certainly the facilitation, being in the room with individuals, and what does that look like. And then part two, I really want to kind of talk more specifically about doing group work with Native clients, with Native patients, with Native community members. So that calls into question different types of communication styles, that we need to be mindful of the different cultural considerations. How do we engage folks in a group? We could have the best heart on the planet and the best intentions, but we may not have people showing up. We may not have people coming through the door to attend groups. So how do we engage folks? And then lastly, when folks are in the door, how do we get folks, how do we retain the individuals we have into participating in this type of approach, treatment, therapy, what have you? Okay. All right, so let's talk about the how-to. So there are different types of groups, and I want to break down just a couple of the main ones that I think we use in the work that we do. Foremost is what is known as a psychoeducational group, right? Psychoeducational. The purpose is to provide information on specific issues. For example, to teach healthy coping skills. It could be traditional cooking classes. It could be how to perform rescue breathing if you are working with injection drug users or opiate users. It's really to expand clients' awareness of behaviors and their consequences, and to assist moving folks towards change. Frequently used to address substance use and other problematic behaviors. The facility takes the role as a teacher. So it's sort of this dual role. One, you're holding space for folks to process difficult emotions and difficult life events, and you're also providing education components either at each group meeting, like maybe say 30-minute check-ins, and then there's a 30-minute teaching piece. I know in the state of Florida, to address breast cancer among Native women, the state of Florida supported an intervention called the Shawl Making Circle. And so women would bring different fabrics and different shawls for powwow regalia. They'd come meet once a month, and yes, it was to share patterns, share this creative space, but also to learn education around breast cancer and HIV. Another type of group is specifically skills development groups, right? Here the purpose is to cultivate skills people will need to achieve and maintain abstinence or maintain some sort of behavior change. And it operates from a cognitive behavioral orientation. Also, if you can't hear me, if there's any issues with the sound, just let us know in the chat box and I can adjust that. Okay. We also have cognitive and behavioral groups. And here, the facilitator focuses on providing a structured environment within which group members can examine their behaviors, thoughts, and beliefs that might lead to maladaptive coping behaviors, such as turning to the bottle, turning to drugs. Are there other strategies we can think about besides, turning to a six-pack at the end of a stressful day? And the more famous, I think, in popular culture, the 80s and 90s certainly, is this idea of self-help groups or support groups. And this is a type of group in which, originate in the self-help tradition. It's to offer social support. For example, unconditional acceptance, meaning whatever said in the group is allowed to be said in the group. That no hard feelings are off the table to share. Encouraging folks to perhaps journal during that time, or briefly as an exercise, or to journal at the on their own time, to think, to sort of promote inward reflection, right? This is especially useful for folks who might be nervous, or kind of maybe getting their feet wet in terms of group work, and really kind of just help to destigmatize whatever the problematic behavior or thoughts or activities are. Support groups are also, we see that with weight loss groups, exercise, work environments often have, weekly or once a week walking for staff. That's kind of a form of a support group. Especially around weight loss, if you think around the shame and stigma, when you normalize a healthy activity in the work setting, you're helping to destigmatize. Okay, so I got sounds better when I sit back away from the mic. Gotcha. Okay, let's talk a little bit about group membership. And roughly, there's two forms of group membership. There's a fixed and there's a revolving version of membership. And it can often be referred to as sort of an open group or a closed group. Whereas the open format, new members enter and exit the group when ready. In a closed format, the group begins and ends with the same membership. Very often in the closed group format, the first maybe 3 sessions are open, so folks can come and go as they please, but by the 4th session, it switches to a closed group, and that is to ensure that the group begins and ends with the same membership. We'll talk a little bit more about that. All right, so there are some pros and cons to both. If you decide to run a group, or you're currently running a group and you want to adapt it, there are some pros and cons to having either an open or closed group format. Certainly with an open group, the benefit of you running open groups is that you can bring in new energy. There's new people coming into the fold. There's new resources being introduced to the group. And very often, this can be great for folks because they don't have to wait for the start of a new group. They can, this is Kate, everybody.
Sorry about that. On the mic, so I think this might sound a little bit better.
Okay.
Let us know what you think, everybody.
Yes.
If this sounds better.
We are trying to adjust the volume, so if there's any issues, please let us know. Thanks, Kate. There are some sort of, how would you say, cons, or some challenges with running open groups, and that actually the fact that you're bringing in new people on a rotating or revolving door basis can actually be challenging with membership. So think about it, put yourself in that situation. Maybe you have been in the situation where you've attended groups, and if there's always new people coming in the door, it can be kind of hard to foster trust with the other members in the group. And with an open group, there may be a large amount of folks in the room. It may be really popular, so folks may end up still having to wait due to the size. With the closed group format, certainly a benefit to running closed group is that you do get I believe, improved group cohesion. Once that 4th session happens and you change to a closed group and everybody who's in the room stays in, that's the set group. It does foster that sort of peer support, that peer-to-peer mutual aid that is really something to be a witness to, is what I had spoken about earlier. And also another benefit to running a closed group is that the learning builds on previous meetings. So you can sort of keep this group history, if you will. You serve as the historian and sort of helping people remember what was discussed in the last session and sort of keep that momentum moving forward. Obviously, some challenges are, it's a time commitment. Folks, you're asking clients to make a commitment to join a closed group. What you're asking them is, would you participate in this intervention for the full 10, 12 weeks? And generally people, you want to have that conversation because folks might not be ready. And if they're ready and they agree and they say yes, they're making a time commitment. That's 12 weeks out of their life where they have to show up somewhere at the same time. And if you're working with folks who are actively using, not to demonize or stigmatize active users, but new parents or people who have full-time jobs or whatever the case may be, it's a commitment that folks may not be able to adhere to. Okay. All right. So before placing an individual into a particular group, we want to consider a few things. As I mentioned in the last slide, readiness. Is the individual ready for group work? Not everybody is. Some people are just, barely ready for individual level counseling, and maybe group counseling is a little too far, too far out there for at this stage. So that's something we need to consider. And the way you do that is you have a conversation with the client. Is this something you might be interested in? Here's what would be expected of you. Here's what we can anticipate the benefits will be. Have that conversation. And if you're not ready, and you can always add, if you're not ready now, this is something to consider down the line, right? We want to think about personal characteristics and needs and preferences. The individual may not need to move to different groups as they progress through treatment. So in other words, we might think a particular group might be a good setting, but that actually turns out maybe not a good setting, and so they're maybe moving through different interventions, maybe encountering setbacks or becoming more or less committed to addressing problematic behaviors. These are all wonderful topics to bring up and to sort of air out before making the commitment to join a group. We also, in group work, there's very often voluntary or involuntary groups. Involuntary groups have often historically taken place, through the criminal justice system, juvenile court systems. Coercion into group involvement may result in initial resistance. However, that may experience better outcomes overall. There is always that possibility that even though it may be challenging to commit to at first, or someone sort of mandated to attend a group, that can be challenging at first, but we always want to keep the door open to hope, meaning that this may actually be a life-changing event. We want to encourage folks to consider something new, to try something new. Certainly with involuntary groups, there could be legal obligations, as I've mentioned. Family pressure could be a factor in sort of coercing somebody to join a group, or any external motivating factor can lead clients sort of resisting the desire to discontinue. Actually can lead folks to wanting to discontinue before reaching their goals. And certainly self-motivation to change once in the group can inspire other group members. With voluntary groups, voluntary group members often assist in providing motivation. So in other words, folks are making a decision to show up to a group, right? That in and of itself demonstrates a level of readiness. Folks carry that into the room with them in the group meeting. Other folks who might be hesitant might be inspired by that readiness. So they can help provide motivation to others. Self-motivation to change, again, positively impacts the overall process and shapes group culture and norms. Often, clients indicate the primary mode of help is through mutual support. That's what I've been talking about thus far this morning. In other words, it's not me, it's not you that's the most important, actually, but very often it's the people in the room that they're sitting in the chairs next to. We see this when you're on that track, if you're running a group, when somebody shares a very sad story, they're very down, they're feeling lost and hopeful. This is a great time to take a step back and to see how the other members manage that in terms of offering a tissue, maybe putting, saying, hey, I've been through that too, I know what that's like. Those are perfect golden examples of mutual support, and that's kind of what you want to see. So, we know that this is true when we go to our favorite, if you think back to being in school or taking any kind of classes, We want to go to the classes where our friends are in, where we know we will be liked and appreciated. Um, you know, that all helps in motivating behavior change. Members who reported improvement were significantly more likely to have felt accepted by the other members. When asked, in this particular example, clients made specific references to other individuals. So-and-so is really, I thought so-and-so was really helpful, or I really related so really well to so-and-so. I felt like her and I had the same life experiences, that sort of feeling accepted, right? And also, folks self-reported improvement were significantly more likely to have perceived being similar in some way among the other group members. So feeling the sort of commitment to others, you identify with them, you feel accepted by them. I mean, these are all ingredients for success. And this is not really any of your doing. Really what you're doing is you're creating space. You're holding space for this to happen, and you're allowing this to emerge. That's really the art form. There's also a difference between sort of self-help groups and with regard to membership and mutual help. Self-help implies the individual in treatment is the main contributor to the change process. Whereas mutual help means the individual also assumes partial responsibility in the changing of their peers. So again, mutual aid, mutual help. I, I think actually both of these constructs, self-help and mutual help, is part of any group membership. We all want to, if we're being, for example, being mandated to attend a group and we don't want to go, we follow through with it. There is a level of motivation in that, right? We are taking some level of responsibility in the change process. And then once we're in the group setting, witnessing peer support, that mutual support, it can be really inspiring. I can't say that enough. I know I've said that a million times. Again, it is my favorite sort of therapeutic intervention. While we're implementing our groups as the facilitators, we are responsible for establishing the parameters, right? The sort of the general guidelines for safety, providing general behavioral expectations while clarifying the purpose of the group. We do this individually before we invite folks to the group, and we do this, maybe we might even do this at the beginning of every session, depending on what kind of group we're running, but outlining these sort of general behavioral expectations. Let's not be disruptive, try to be here on time, that kind of thing. The point of this group is to fill in the blank. We might even go a step further, and instead of using the term, let's establish some group rules, or let's develop some group agreements. I always try to use the term group values, and we can solicit ideas from membership around what would make a good meeting for us today. Like, what are the elements we need for a successful group? No cross-talking. Again, being on time. Using I statements. Those are examples of group values that we might want to implement. Rules or sort of violation of these values. For example, if you are a mandatory reporter, reminding folks of when confidentiality will be broken. If someone intends to harm themselves or others, or has been harmed, you do have to break confidentiality, and we should communicate that. And yeah, and again, incorporating ideas and sort of having this ongoing. If you are deciding to do group values at the start of a group, I always like to revisit it and invite more suggestions or changes as we move forward. It's just it's a quick way to get buy-in and make people feel like they're part of the process. We don't want to make them too complicated or too restrictive. We do have a focus on safety. We do have a focus on honesty and integrity and respect for self and others. As a facilitator, it is part of my practice to be there early, to help set up, to not be rushed, to be mindful of me as I'm getting prepared to start a group, 30 minutes ahead of time, maybe even more than that, to get in the game of like being able to hold space. In other words, put my issues aside for the next hour and a half or however much time is necessary to hold space for others. That's a very intentional mindset. Um, again, going back to the group rules, just being flexible and open to amending, adding, adjusting, and again, reviewing those group agreements or group values at each meeting if necessary. Oh, here's some more examples of group values. So respecting confidentiality, willingness to self-disclose, encouraging participation by all group members. There's this sort of slang terminology, step up, step back. I very much will say, if you're the kind of person that likes to talk a lot, maybe take a step back to give space for somebody else to share. And if you're the person that likes to sit back and not share very often, take a risk and encourage and maybe make an effort to share more and this time around. So having those being very kind of not overly complicated, being very plain in what you're trying to state is helpful, I think. Respecting others, willingness to accept feedback, allowing others to speak without interruptions. I mean, these are all sort of standard, if you will. With regard to implementation, by providing an initial overview, like I said, having a conversation with the person on an individual level, and then re-bringing up those issues again to the larger group, clients will then will come to the group with appropriate expectations. And you can expect a greater degree of success if everybody is on the same page, right? There are some stages of group development with regard to your leadership in the group setting. The initial stage, when everybody's initially coming together, is the forming stage. Getting to know each other, understanding the group task. There might be introductory exercises, sort of kind of a more open format, allowing folks to share, to talk. This is, if you're running a 12-week group, this forming stage could last a couple of sessions, the first handful of sessions, depending on who the clients are. Think about native clients in this setting. The next stage is the storming stage. Folks might be kind of getting antsy or a little edgy about what is it we're actually doing here. Wondering if this is something I really, clients may ask themselves, do I really need to commit now? Now that I see what it's about, do I really need to stay for the remainder of the weeks? And your task is really to kind of just to give a sense of security, provide feedback of the process so far. It's really great, for example, it's really great when folks are here on time. I'm happy you came back. We're just getting started. This is a process, to trust the process. Those are kind of messages you can communicate. In the norming stage of the group, there is kind of this sort of settling into group roles. So there is a development of procedure for achieving group tasks. People are more on the same page, more or less on the same page of where this is headed and what's happening. They know what to expect when they come back, in other words. There is increased trust between group members. You might see stronger relationships and support between group members. This is also a time you might want to clarify boundaries. We might add to our group values list, remind members to not discuss what's discussed in the group outside of the group. You might have to revisit some of those boundaries. With regard to stages of group development, there's the performing stage. We're off and rolling, right, in this particular stage. The group is involved in the activities to achieve the tasks. We offer encouragement, we offer support. In other words, I like to think of it as a cheerleader. Celebrating the small successes, right? Keeping that balance between maintaining the group with regard to boundaries and confidentiality and safety and the task at hand, and managing individual needs. I mean, you're in the zone, and this is awesome. It's a great place to be. Also, in this performing stage, we might begin um, to start terminating or ending the group, right? Which would be the final stage, the adjourning phase of the group, the ending of the group. Um, I like to, whether I'm doing individual level psychotherapy or I'm running a 12-week group, I always begin to terminate at session one. I want to remind folks that there is a beginning, a middle, and an end. It can be painful to end when folks are really in this, when clients are in the zone and folks are, showing up and putting their trust in you and putting their trust in others. It can be almost traumatic, trauma with a little t, right? Saying goodbye to a support or saying goodbye to something that actually was beneficial. But this is exactly what you need to be able to role model, is how to terminate a relationship in a healthy way. You're saying goodbye and evaluating the task. You're helping clients reflect back and asking the question, did we achieve what we set out to achieve? You're talking about next steps. What's going on? What will life be like after the group? And then processing that maybe in a session. What are some of the risks in leaving the group once we end? Having these real targeted discussions can be very beneficial. Yeah, again, making plans for the future. Yep. Okay. I'm going to pause there if there's any questions. We got amazing folks from all over the country. I'm glad the sound is better. Um, Anna Nunez is hearing two voices. I don't know if that's the webinar or if that's something else. Let us know, Anna. I don't mean to make fun. Yeah, there's two playing simultaneously. Okay, and there's some folks from Akimet territory, my neck of the woods. All right, moving forward. With regard to implementation of groups, in creating the group, remember that in most cases, you are the single common element among all group members, right? So people are putting a lot of trust in you, and that's a good thing. You can do this. In shaping the group, your experience and behavior, as well as the expectations of group members, will guide the formation of norms. I think this is all vibrational, not to sound too new agey, but it's really you and using your body as a tool. How you mentally prepare before you go into the space, how you set up the space, how you welcome folks into the space. That's all kind of helping shape the group and guides the formation of norms and how the group is run. In maintaining the group, you function as a mediator, handling issues that might arise which threaten group cohesion. Maybe there's a fight in between, or there's disagreement between group members. You're the mediator in that scenario. Your job is to help the group function properly. And the way you do that is by showing confidence in your abilities, right? Remember, it's vibrational. You walk in there, you got this, you're almost fearless, even though you might be scared to death, you're almost fearless in doing this work because you have to be able to hold that space. Remaining calm, doing your breathing work, taking 3 deep breaths before you walk into the space. It's all part of providing a safe environment. And right, what's the point of doing all this work if we're not really giving it 100%, is how I see it. And giving 100% means you got to do your stuff too. So, for example, here's a typical open group agenda. Personally, I don't actually even open or close groups. I don't like to have agendas, but we thought we'd throw this in there if you'd like to. And I'll explain a little bit more about that in a second. So you might have some immediate check-ins. We might do a quick exercise, breathing exercise. It doesn't even need to be 10 minutes. It could be 2 minutes. It could be 1 minute, right? Just to center the room. And we might go over group values and group agreements that we discussed. Take note of any new folks in the room. We might even have a review of what we discussed in the last group. And then we might move into a more formal check-in, where folks go around the room and share, sort of round robin style. This is actually, yeah, an open group. I was actually taught in my training, with open groups, you actually have zero agenda. That you walk in there and you let the clients lead the discussion. They designate what the topic is for the day. You really do play a back seat. At least that's how I've ran groups. I really do play a back seat when it comes to, quote unquote, an agenda. That it is really client-led, client-centered. And that's really what we want to do anyway. We want to be client-centered. We want to encourage clients to take the lead in managing their own health and wellness. And one way we do that is by taking a step back and allowing the members to define what's discussed within the hour. So in this case, moving same agenda, there's actually an introduction of a specific topic. How do I better handle high-risk using environments in my recovery today? Great topic. Maybe, but folks may not want to talk about that, and you may actually lose people because this topic may not even apply to them. So it is, you kind of are covering yourself in a way by letting the clients initiate the discussion rather than coming in with an agenda. Again, think about Native audiences. Nobody really wants to have to answer to an agenda if we're trying to take charge of our own health. And I believe we have another example. Oh, I guess that's the only example agenda. Okay, so some common tasks of a group facilitator. Primary, first of all, maintaining a safe environment. If there's physical, emotional, spiritual, what have you, violence or some kind of disruption, we wanna address that straight away. And in fact, I would encourage you, if you are newer to group work, to have a co-facilitator who actually is more the silent partner in the room, who sits directly across from you in the circle to maintain eye contact with them in case you need them. But they are the ones who actually are assisting with welcoming and setting up, and they come in real handy when people show up late to group. They can help get them signed in, help them get to their seat, kind of just being sort of support hands on deck. They can also assist if there's a situation or a safety issue. They can help get support, whatever the case may be, security, a supervisor, or what have you. Another common task, as I'd mentioned before, you serve as a group historian, so you can summarize what was discussed in the last session. Reminding folks to be here and now, redirecting or bringing them back to the purpose of the group. Drug users, social workers, whoever, like to tell war stories. And so, going on and on about a story that happened in the past is great, but is it related to the purpose of why we're in the room in the first place? Sort of redirecting and learning how to redirect conversation back to the purpose of the meeting. That's a skill set that takes time to develop. It doesn't come natural to me. We're helping folks discover answers for themselves. We're not there to solve their problems. That is not your role. Your role is to hold space for folks to discover answers for themselves. And it's perfectly fine to have fun. Please have a sense of humor. Use your professional judgment. Wear a smile. If you're not really funny as a person, at least slap a smile on when welcoming folks. It really does make a difference with regard to engagement, I believe. Oh, and I did talk about war stories, redirecting war stories of the past or what was lost. And encouraging folks to use I statements as opposed to saying, well, making generalizations about them or their family or their community, really putting I statements. I experienced this as opposed to we experienced this. I did mention the role of a co-facilitator. So the main facilitator, the lead, right, is prepared, is responsible for all the paperwork that needs to get done, right? greets and welcomes each and every participant, guides the discussion, manages participation, thanks participants, helps clean up, and participates in a debrief process with the co-facilitator. The co-facilitator, again, avoids sitting side by side. Sit directly across from each other if you can. They can be in charge of nonverbal cues of members. So if folks are getting hot in the room or perhaps folks are getting cold, the co-facilitator can maybe close the door or adjust the temperature or what have you, handle sign-in sheets, interruptions, they can handle all that, help monitor time, help clean up, and participate in the debrief process. Rita Lestos, who is a provider in Minnesota, I'm reading in the comments, use mindful movements and breathing at the beginning of group. Perfect. Low light lamps, essential oils. Oh, that just sounds like, can I join your group? I would love to go into a space that's dimly lit, take some deep breaths, be in the company of other like-minded individuals. That is really healing, just in and of itself. Nice work. Okay, I'm going to switch gears a little bit and now talk about group work from a Native perspective when we do this work with Native individuals and communities. All right, so Native, what do I mean by Native? I'm talking about American Indian Alaska Native individuals. That also includes folks from Hawaii, Native Hawaiians. I'm also talking about First Nations, our relatives up north and the Canadian side of the border. I'm also including folks from Mexico and our cousins down at on the southern side of the border. I'm also, I don't mean to say other indigenous, like I'm not trying to other folks, but just folks who identify indigenous in general, whether they be from Taiwan, whether they be from New Zealand or Australia. So indigenous folks, that's what I mean when I say Native. Native people, there are over 573 federally recognized tribes in the lower 48. You know, that number has grown in the last, I believe last year, maybe it's been over a year. It was 564, if I'm not mistaken, and now we're up to 573. We know that there are 231 tribal communities in Alaska and within the Hawaiian Islands. And we also need to be mindful with regard to, given that diversity, I should say, sheer diversity of Native identity and experiences and traditions and customs, that what comes with that are different, or I should say, we should be mindful of Native communication styles, which can be very different in Indian country. And this is very relevant if you're trying to run a group to encourage people to speak, if we are not mindful of different communication styles. So this is kind of like what I'm trying to basically communicate is sort of this worldview perspective, this Native worldview with regard to communication. Communication styles for Native clients cannot be generalized. However, it is an important concept to discuss in working to improve providers' ability to work with Native folks. So if you're a supervisor or if you're running groups, we have to be mindful of this. Native folks are sometimes taught that listening rather than speaking immediately is most important, out of respect, right? This is a sign of respect to listen rather than speak. All right, so that can, right out the gate, present challenges to group work. Personal information about oneself, one's family, one's tribe, one's community is not easily shared for very specific reasons. There is a legacy of harm, even just think about research in general. Think about researchers going into community, taking what they need and leaving. You know, that's personal information folks have taken. And that's a historical legacy that communities, that's alive and well in communities today. So being mindful of that. Being silent or minimal sharing should not be interpreted as disinterest or an indication that nothing is wrong. I have a really funny story. I've never shared this story, but it's actually not my story, but it's really appropriate right now. I have a really good friend, LCSW, licensed clinical social worker, and she's near retirement. She called herself the White Lady. She talked about, and she's done amazing work in tribal communities in the Mountain Plains region. But she talked about the first time she went to go. I wasn't there, but I can just see how this played out. She talked about how she went to some reservation up in the plains. I've never been. She got off the plane. They had to drive 3 hours to get there. She never forgets it. She goes up to deliver this 1 day training, and it's packed with tribal members. And there's even a mother there with a baby, holding a baby in her arms the entire training. And she's still, I think it's motivational interviewing. She's giving this day-long motivational interviewing training to folks from the res, and she said the entire day, not one person said one thing the entire time. We came back from lunch and she starts up again and she's like, nobody said anything, not even the baby made a noise throughout the entire training. And she said she couldn't figure it out. She was like, they just sat there with blank looks on their face, just staring at me the entire time. And she was convinced, she's a seasoned trainer. I love sitting in her trainings. And she was convinced that this was the worst training she had ever given in her life. And as it turns out, the evaluations were glowing. They were like specifically naming things that she had talked about and saying, we want more information on this. Can you come back and provide another training? And so again, so tying this back to this slide, silence or minimal sharing should not always be interpreted as disinterest or an indication that something is wrong. People are perhaps just processing what you're saying. Okay, where English is the individual's or the client's second language, we just need to be mindful that speech may be thoughtful or slower, thinking of our elders, and also thinking about our elders. Some Native people may believe that talking about a topic can will it to come true. I know I ran into this in the Southwest with a tribe down in the Southwest when in my HIV prevention, my HIV prevention work. Didn't want to talk about HIV because they felt like, though, that's a white man's disease and it's going to come into our community. That's something to have to unpack and to process, and that takes time in and of itself. All right, so thinking about the cultural considerations. The clinical experience, the therapeutic experience, the process of doing group work is a biopsychosocial and spiritual experience, and it builds upon and fosters relationships. So when you're working with an individual or you're working with a group of folks, a main objective should be to build trust. Think back to that when I talked about the historical legacy of harm that's been inflicted upon Native communities. You represent that, whether you're Native or not. Just because I'm Native doesn't mean I can walk into any community and start running groups and have, a line out the door. That trust has to be established. And again, that takes more than just one session very often. This could be over a period of months and years. But the payoff is so great and so amazing when you get to do really good collaborative work with community. It's life-changing for all parties involved. When we build trust, it increases the likelihood that folks will stay adherent to treatment plans and stay on the course of walking a good path. And it keeps folks from, dipping out, ideally, and they keep coming back and wanting to participate in their wellness. Also, building trust, one way we can build trust is to reaffirm clients as experts. They are the experts in their own health, mental, behavior, and spiritual experiences. And so by stating as such, we're helping them to identify and be sort of the change makers in their own life, which ultimately increases motivation. So, group work. How does this fit with the Native worldviews? Well, most often, working effectively with Native communities requires a shift in the delivery of our services from our training. I'm just going to say that. From whatever training we come from, whatever discipline we come from, it often requires a shift. Why? Because our training is very often centered on the individual. And when we work with Native communities, we have to think of the collective, right? That's the main distinction between the two. So how do we work from this culturally relevant perspective? Well, first off, you gotta understand the importance of spirituality. If you are non-native, or even if you are native and you're working with a community, you might want to be like aware of what spiritual practices or what are the spiritual traditions. Are there spiritual healers in the community you could use as a referral? Those kinds of. Well, I shouldn't say it like that. That sounds bad. Use as a referral. Are there spiritual folks in the community who are wanting and willing to help be a part of this process? That's something you can find out just by simple conversations with coworkers and such. Understanding that spirituality is part of this holistic approach to wellness, this holistic meaning mind, body, spirit, and emotions, this whole body approach to wellness. And that goes beyond just the individual or the community. We're talking about respect for nature, respect for the environment, respect for the land, really. The land that we're all on right now is indigenous land, and honoring that and naming that when we can. Having this higher level respect for our bodies, our mind, and our connection to our past, our ancestors, creator. I mean, these are all tenets of indigenous spirituality. Relatives, cousins. I mean, this kinship is part of spirituality. It's part of our healing. It's part of our identity. And if you think of colonialism, was a direct attack on our identity, to eliminate it, to kill it off, to rid of it. So when you hold space for folks to sit in their identity, to learn and have an appreciation, a higher level of respect for their mind and their body and their connection to their ancestors, woo, you are doing some amazing, heavy duty spiritual work just by holding that space alone. This slide always gets me every time I see it. In my experience, I have to have considerations with regard to taboo subjects. As an HIV prevention trainer, I know HIV is a taboo subject, and it is still a taboo subject. Maybe not as much as it was 10, 15 years ago. In contrast to something like diabetes, there's diabetes fun runs, diabetes awareness campaigns in tribal rural communities, but you don't see that very much with taboo, quote unquote, taboo subjects such as HIV awareness, although that's changing. And let me just pause right here to put a plug in. You may or may not be aware, March 20th of every year is National Native HIV/AIDS Awareness Day. All racial ethnic communities have a day, and March 20th is our day. And the reason why we chose March 20th is because it's the day of the spring equinox, a day for rebirth, a day for recommitment. So your organization very easily could do a very basic community awareness campaign around HIV prevention, offer condoms and brochures, and if you have testing, encourage people to get tested on that day. We at the ATTC are one of our National Native HIV/AIDS Awareness Day events on March 20th is I'm facilitating LGBTQ Two-Spirit health and wellness training in Seattle, Washington. So, putting things together, raising awareness. Okay, unpause. I just had to mention that because we are in March and I wanted to encourage you all to do that. Getting back to taboo subjects, LGBTQ, two-spirit folks, sexual behaviors, things like talking about anal sex as a risk factor. I mean, all of this can be, not just even Native communities, but any community, this can be considered taboo. Drug use, talking about one's own drug use is a very personal and private, often, embarrassing topic of discussion, much like your own sexual behaviors. I mean, it's not something you want to put on display. So in other words, we're creating space to have these conversations. There could be cultural issues of modesty and privacy. There can be very well issues around cross-gender communication between men and women. Um, in modesty, may not be about shyness, but about respect, as I said earlier. There are some cultural risk factors we should be mindful of. The lack of confidentiality. As a community member, you may not want to set foot in your organization. The organization, I may not want to set foot in your organization because, hey, my cousin was there and all her business got spread around town, and I can't trust, their front desk clerks to keep my information private. Why would I want to go attend a group there where I'm going to talk about very personal and private matters? If that's the case, you might consider holding your group off-site at another space. But trust is really the bottom line here. At the end of the day, really, your goal is to build trust and keep that trust and maintain that trust. So just be aware of that. It goes really deep when we factor in things like historical trauma and racism and colonialism and white supremacy. If you're a trusting provider, man, that can make all the difference in the work. There are other issues such as lack of supportive services in your community. Maybe there isn't another alternative. Maybe there are no other options besides your group or your services. That's something to think about. Something I don't talk about very much, but it can come up, and that is circular migration. If you are actively working in treatment plans with clients and they are attending, for example, a closed group, and they've made a commitment to be there all 12 weeks, and for whatever reason they disappear after week 6, rather than immediately jumping to the conclusion that they are quote unquote unmotivated or resistant to change or hard to work with or difficult, circular migration might actually be the reason why. And that is when, for example, if I'm in Seattle, I suddenly have to return home back to Tucson because I have to care for an elder, or there's a death in the family, or there's a ceremony that has to take place, and I have to hightail it back. The same is true in the opposite directions. I may be home living in my community, but let's say I need a job and the only work is outside in the big city, or I go to graduate school and I have to live in a different state. It's this circular migration of returning to ancestral homeland and then living in a city or a different area because of love or because of romance or work or to use drugs or whatever the case may be. Maybe you're not out about your sexual orientation back home, but in the city you can be. So there's different reasons why folks may move back and forth between sort of this urban and rural life experience, but that's not uncommon among Native folks. We talked about unresolved traumas, whether they be historical or contemporary. That term historical trauma in reference to genocide, ethnocide. People think of that as like 500 years ago, which it was. People think of that as like 100 years ago, which it was. But it's also ongoing now. Think of the border wall on my reservation. Think of extraction of resources. Think of pipelines and using land for the benefit of profit. Those are all examples of how folks have taken from our communities, and that's traumatic. So being aware of those. And as I mentioned before, being mindful of racism, homophobia, xenophobia, which is a fear of strangers or folks not like you. And sort of kind of wrapping this up, you have the opportunity to provide culturally respectful and meaningful mental health services, period. What a great opportunity. There is a pervasive and ongoing need for it, right? For Native-centric, there's a pervasive and ongoing need for it, but even more so, there's a pervasive ongoing need for Native-centric or culturally sensitive mental health services. We know this. We know communities are struggling. And if you can be somebody who works from an indigenous worldview and strive to provide services that are, sensitive, gosh, that's half the battle right there. The next part of the battle would be to encourage generations behind us who, to pursue careers in mental health, to pursue working with community. Um, and then one of the beautiful benefits of being in your role, working directly on the front lines, is that you have the ability to know and understand trends and needs as they play out in real time in the community you work. And that is a key and vital role because you can communicate up what you're seeing happen. We know that this is the case with frontline workers, who are addressing the opiate crisis, who are aware of fentanyl, a higher potent opiate entering in their community, and not only being laced into oxycontin or heroin, whatever the drug may be, but also fentanyl showing up in methamphetamine and cocaine. Those kinds of trends and those kinds of emerging needs is what you have your finger on the pulse on. And so by sharing that information, it helps us to develop better trainings, to be able to respond and support your needs more specifically, and to respond and help you in the work that you're doing. All right, with regard to engaging, how do we engage folks into care? Confidentiality can be an absolute barrier to care. Just be mindful of that. We talked about there may be personal experiences with breaches of confidentiality. And I know we all, everyone on this call, we strive to have the highest level of confidentiality. If we're serious about improving the quality of life for Native people, but for all people, using culture as to help the engagement process. Introductions are important from an indigenous worldview perspective. Shaking hands is often a customary, respectful gesture. Reaffirming folks as experts in their own experience. You might want to consider an opening and closing prayer. If ideally someone from the local group or someone from the local community, perhaps an elder in the group. If you're Native and the group wants a prayer, or if that's something that is sort of I don't want to say require, but if that's something you decide to do, you may have to lead it yourself. So that's something to be mindful of. Speaking, there is this thing called the 10-second rule. I don't think I've yet to actually last 10 seconds because it's very difficult to do. Practice it for yourself. When you pose a question to the group, pause and count in your head for 10 seconds. And so that was 10 seconds. What you're doing is creating space for people to respond, and you're giving a little extra cushion for folks who might have different communication styles. It's hard to do, I'll just be honest. But that's one tip that you might want to put in your tool belt. Before we begin running groups, you might want to know who the local Native organizations are, get a referral list going, contact them, make sure the contact information is still correct. Here's a really critical, actually I should probably move this up to number 1. To engage folks into care, you got to be, and if you're serious about improving, health and wellness of the people you work for and with, you got to show up to other Native events in your community. Not all the time, but I think it's important, even for non-Native, maybe more so for non-Native folks who are trying to, deliver services. Once in a while, you might want to show up and just kind of appreciate a community health fair or a powwow or, so these open events that Native organizations host. Just not only support them in their work, but you want to just kind of, show your face. And I think that's not talked about very much. In other words, it's a two-way street. If you're expecting folks to come in through your door, then in some way you got to kind of show up for them in some way. Snacks, not everyone really most people don't have a budget for snacks. What I do is I go to the dollar store and I buy a couple boxes of granola bars. And for folks who I know who are homeless, marginally housed, who are active users, who I know who haven't eaten anything that day, I can bust out with a healthy granola bar as opposed to, say, a candy bar, right? Or a bag of apples or a bag of oranges, whatever the case may be. Um, and if not, if you don't have that, then you can easily offer, you know, the dollar store again, right? And get a thing of paper cups or plastic cups, whatever the case may be. But you can offer water, and we know that water is life. So, don't minimize that step. That's another way to engage folks. We talk about incentives. If you can offer, $10 gas cards to attend every group session, more power to you. The literature speaks to this, that it kind of asks this question, well, are folks showing up for services only to get the $10 gas card? Or are they really motivated to show up for group because they want to take charge of their health, take charge of their health? And as what I think is, as long as the person is returning for services, it doesn't matter why they're there. You have the golden opportunity to engage and build trust, and that is, again, the bottom line. Some native retention strategies and tips from me to you. Build relationships with community leaders. Be consistent when building these relationships. If you're going to say you're going to do something, do something. Talk about your program. Let them know what's going on. Giving ample time to process information and ask questions. Getting local organizational support. That really can only be done face to face. You might have a well-intending, very polite, smiley face email, but you can't go by that. It's better to go in person, and I like to show up with a bag of oranges or a box of donuts or something. I don't know, just something to be, I don't know. It sets the tone, and I like to do that face to face. And again, it may take multiple efforts. You may talk to many different staff members. There may be staff changes. This may be an ever unfolding process, but what you're doing is communicating that you're the real deal, that you are serious about what you have to offer and you think that it could be of help, and that, can they partner with you in helping identify folks for your group work? You might have, this is kind of getting back to that psychoeducational group format where there's both support and education. That can take the form of bead groups, beading groups. Talked about shawl making circles or traditional food classes. Great way to build trust and connections. And it really does take the professional out of you and kind of make it more of a personal experience for the participants. And lastly, reminding clients of Native specific cultural strengths. So, reminding clients that they are strong, reminding clients that they are resilient. The fact that a client came back for session, that's a win. And acknowledging that as a success builds motivation, courage, and facilitates healing. Native folks don't hear this very often. I believe Native people know these strengths because they are demonstrated in our stories, among our elders, and through ceremonies, but sometimes, if not, regularly, it needs to be pointed out, reminded of, and built upon. Can mean all the difference, right? Here's some examples of those values and strengths. We are survivors. We have in our ancestors. We are ancestors ourselves to future generation. We are resilient. We are adaptable. We have this community-minded perspective. We are rooted in our spirituality. We have a connection to the past. We love our family, elders, and our youth. We have this sort of whole body thinking, this holistic thinking approach. We have pride in our culture, our languages, our food. We have pride in our land. We have pride in our ceremonies and many other aspects. All right, Sapa, thank you very much for taking time out of your day. There's my email address. Feel free to reach out to me. I can take questions now. But really, thank you for doing this important, amazing work, and know that you have my prayers and my support. And yeah, do well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Matt. That was really, really helpful. Just wonderful to hear all of your ideas, and thank you all for sharing some more ideas and comments throughout the session. And yeah, we'll take a few moments for questions. If anyone has any questions here, please submit them in the chat pod. But I wanted to, there's a couple things I wanted to let everyone know about while we're on today. I am going to put a link in the chat box for an event that we are putting on. It's actually put on by our mental health project, and this is a project enhancement and implementation training in San Diego, which is taking place April 14 and 15. It's a free training, and it's actually, the hotel is covered, and so this is going to be like a start of a learning community. So people who are wanting some help learning how to go through the process of project implementation, it would start with this 2-day training in San Diego, and then there will be follow-up for, I think, a 5 to 6 week period that there would be virtual meetings to discuss. So I'm going to put the link to that in the chat right now, because we are still trying to recruit for this, and we would love to have an application by March 13 for that. And then I just wanted to remind everyone too that we recorded this presentation so you can view it later. We'll actually send all of you a follow-up email with that link to the recording, as well as the link to the survey in case you don't get redirected to that when we finish out here, and also handouts of the slides. So watch for that. Usually we send those out on Fridays, so that should come from one of our students who works here. So I think that is all the information I need to pass on to you. And so, yeah, I just want to thank you, and I want to thank Matt again. He's such a great trainer, and I just loved hearing him share. So I really appreciate it, Matt. Thank you so much for doing that.
Yeah. No, and I too want to plug that training in San Diego that's coming up this month. As far as I know, everything is covered except for your airfare. So if you are looking to build up your program, if you need some sort of hands-on assistance with grant writing and kind of unpacking that, and with an amazing grant writer, she's an amazing woman who's leading the training. It's really kind of a premier opportunity if you can find a way to get to San Diego, like the plane ride there. But the hotel, things are covered once you get there. So click on the link if that's something you want to do. There was a comment up here just wanted to touch on real quick from Rita Lestos. I've been doing groups for 10 years. I really am enjoying all your sharing. One weak spot I feel I have is wanting to give answers. I too was trained in client-centered, client-directed, and I often say, this is your group, your recovery, right? So people want answers, you reflect that back and remind them, well, this is your group, this is your recovery process. What do you think? What do others think? Engaging in this discussion can sort of maybe take the pressure off of having to be the one with the answers, right? Because that's not what our role is. Thank you, Rita. That's a great tip. I appreciate that. Yeah, so feel free to reach out. You can reach out by email. I'm here to support you. We're here to support you. And thank you for your time.
Wonderful. Yeah, thank you, Matt. Anna asked about whether that training offers CEUs, and yes, we do offer CEUs for that. That'll be through NADAC that our CEUs are available. So that is something you can also obtain if you attend that. So thank you so much for asking. Yeah, and with that, I'll close this out for today. And thank you all for joining us again, and hope to see you here next time.